My husband of 25 years toasted our anniversary by telling his family I was just the maid he felt sorry for. He had no idea what his grandmother had been keeping in her purse for 25 years. My husband raised his glass, smiled at the room full of people I had spent 3 months organizing this dinner for, and called me the maid he married. 1 second of absolute silence. Then a few people laughed. I sat in my navy dress, the one I had chosen carefully, the one I had driven 40 minutes to find because I wanted to look like a woman who belonged at her own table, and felt 19 years old again. Not in the warm way, in the way of cold tile floors and other people's staircases and the particular weight of a mop handle at 6 in the morning. Only I was 47, and the man doing it was my husband of 25 years, and he was still smiling. There are moments in a marriage that function like fault lines. You don't see them forming. You're busy, raising a child, running a household, filling in the cracks as they appear because you've convinced yourself that's what love requires. And then one evening, in a private room at Hartwell's restaurant, with white roses on every table that you personally selected from 3 different florists, the ground simply opens. That was the night I learned the difference between a woman who endures and a woman who is done. I am done. I had been cleaning houses for 6 years when I first walked into the Caldwell estate. I was 19. I had come to this country from Guatemala at 16 with my aunt, who worked in a hotel laundry and believed, with a faith I found both touching and practical, that work was the only door that never required an invitation. I learned English from daytime television and library books. I got my GED at 17. By 19, I was working for a cleaning service, prestige home care, lime green polo shirts, 3 clients a day, and saving every spare dollar towards something I hadn't yet named but could feel the shape of. The Caldwell estate was a Thursday assignment. 4,000 square feet of pale stone and dark wood in the kind of neighborhood where the trees looked manicured and the silence felt expensive. I was shown around by the housekeeper, a compact woman named Gloria, who had been managing the property for 11 years and had the authority of someone who understood that a house this size ran on invisible labor and chose to honor that fact. Victor Caldwell I met on my 3rd week. He was 24, dark-haired, well-made, the particular confidence of someone who has never been uncertain about where he stood in a room. He was home from a business trip and came into the kitchen while I was cleaning the countertops and stood in the doorway for a moment before saying hello. He said hello like it was a decision. I said hello back like it was just a word. What followed was, by every external measurement, a love story. He began finding reasons to be home on Thursdays. He brought coffee from the kitchen and left it near wherever I was working without comment, without expectation. He asked about my GED, about my aunt, about what I was saving toward. He listened in the way that people listen when they're actually interested, and I was 20 years old and I had not been listened to like that before. 8 months later, I was pregnant. I want to be precise about what happened next because it matters to everything that came after. Victor did not leave. I have to give him that. He did not disappear, did not hand me money and a phone number for a clinic, did not do the thing that men with options sometimes do when consequences arrive. He was frightened. I could see it, the way fear sat behind his eyes and made everything slightly stiff, but he stayed. We married quietly, a civil ceremony, just his grandmother Eleanor Caldwell and my Aunt Rosario as witnesses. His grandmother held my hand before the ceremony and said, in a voice like paper and iron, "You are stronger than you know. Remember that, especially when he makes you doubt it." I was 20 years old. I didn't understand yet that it was a warning. Henry was born 6 months later, 8 pounds and furious, and I became a mother with the same totality with which I had done everything else in my life. Victor's family accepted me with varying degrees of warmth. His parents, Gerald and Patricia, now both gone, were civil in public and cool in private, the kind of people who replace genuine feeling with correct behavior and consider the transaction complete. Victor's grandmother was different. Eleanor Caldwell was then in her mid-60s, a woman who had built the Caldwell family's original wealth through a chain of hardware stores her late husband had started, and she had expanded, who had opinions about everything and kept them sharp through daily use. She came to dinner on Sundays. She asked about my work. When I began taking community college courses, accounting, then business administration, she was the only one who asked what I was studying. I completed my degree in 4 years, taking 2 courses per semester while Henry was small. Victor paid the tuition without comment. I was never sure if this was generosity or the management of optics. I became the bookkeeper for Victor's property management company at 28. I was good at it. Good enough that within 3 years, I was effectively managing the company's finances, the vendor relationships, the contracts. I did not have the title. I did not ask for it. I told myself this was because I preferred to work without visibility. I know now that I had learned, very early in that marriage, that visibility attracted a certain kind of commentary from Victor, that it was safer to be the hand that moved things than the name on the door. The cruelty was never loud. That's the thing about a quarter century of a certain kind of marriage. The erosion is so gradual, so consistently reframed as something else, that you develop the habit of translation. You become fluent in the language of it. You're too sensitive. Translated. Your feelings inconvenience me. I'm just being honest. Translated. I have decided honesty is a license. You know I love you. Translated. That statement should cover what I'm about to do. The first time Victor made a comment about where I came from was at a dinner party maybe 3 years into our marriage. Someone asked how we'd met, and he said with a grin, she was on staff, then laughed to indicate it was a charming story. The guest smiled. I smiled. Henry was 2 years old and upstairs asleep, and and I told myself it was the wine talking. It wasn't the wine. By our 10th anniversary, it had become a pattern so established I'd stopped noticing the individual instances. The comments arrived at dinner parties, at family gatherings, at small moments of private cruelty when no one was watching. Little reminders, calibrated and consistent, of the differential between us, where I had come from, what I had been, who he had generously chosen to make his wife. I brought this, exactly twice, to Dr. Simone Laurent, a therapist I began seeing at 42, 15 years in practice, a specialty in relational dynamics and what she called chronic diminishment. She was the one who gave me language for what I had been living inside. Not dramatic abuse, no single incident terrible enough to point to, but a sustained architectural dismantling of a person's sense of their own worth. He has made himself the ceiling, she said, during our 4th session, and taught you to believe the ceiling is the sky. I thought about that for weeks. I kept going to work. I kept managing the finances of a company I had functionally co-built. I kept making Sunday dinners and keeping the household calendar and raising a son who had, against the odds of his environment, grown into a genuinely decent man. Henry, my Henry. He was 24 by the time of the anniversary dinner, 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, quiet in the way of people who have learned to pay attention because they grew up in a house where what wasn't said mattered as much as what was. He had watched his father his whole life, not with the blindness of a child who worships, with the calibrated clarity of someone who noticed things and filed them away, and loved his mother with a completeness that sometimes made my throat close. He was the one who had first said, at 22, during a Sunday dinner when Victor made a comment about my accent, "Don't," just the one word. Victor had looked at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language, then laughed, but he'd stopped. That was Henry. The 25th anniversary dinner was my idea. I want to say that clearly because it matters for what came after. I planned it. I spent 3 months on it. I contacted Hartwell's restaurant, upscale, a private dining room, the kind of place that requires 4 weeks notice and has a sommelier on staff, and worked with their event coordinator, a meticulous woman named Brianna Sato, to design a dinner for 32 guests, family, close friends, a handful of business associates. I chose the roses. I designed the seating chart by hand on a legal pad and then transferred it to a spreadsheet, moving people around with the care of someone who understands that proximity is its own language. I selected the menu with Hartwell's executive chef, Marcus Webb, 14 years in professional kitchens, 2 regional James Beard nominations, over 2 separate tastings. I did all of this because some part of me, the part that has never fully surrendered despite everything, believed that a beautiful evening, designed with care and filled with people who mattered, might remind us both of something. I understand now what I was actually doing. I was trying to build evidence that the life we had together was real, that it was worth what it had cost me. Victor, in the car on the way to Hartwell's, told me not to hover near the catering staff during dinner. "It reminds people where you came from," he said. He said it looking straight ahead at the road. I looked at my hands in my lap. I said nothing. I had been saying nothing in response to statements like that for so long that the silence came automatically, the way breathing does. I thought, this is the last time. I did not yet know how right I was. We arrived at 6:30 p.m. The room was everything Brianna and I had worked to make it. Warm lit, fragrant with roses, the table set with the kind of care that is invisible when it works. Guests arrived, and the room filled with the particular noise of people who are glad to see each other and glad to be somewhere beautiful. Mrs. Alden was seated at my right. Eleanor Caldwell, Victor's grandmother, was 91 years old and thin as winter light, her white hair set in the style she'd worn for 30 years, one hand always near her carved wooden cane. She was the oldest person in the room by 2 decades and its unambiguous center of gravity. When Eleanor Caldwell entered a room, people turned. Not because of her money, though there was money, but because of what came off her, some quality of having survived and decided what mattered. That made people instinctively straighten. She had squeezed my hand when she sat down, looked at the roses, looked at me. "You did this," she said. "I did," I said. She nodded, once, slowly. The way you nod when something confirms what you already knew. Victor, across the table, was in excellent spirits. He liked a room full of people watching him. He liked the private dining room at Hartwell's. He liked that everyone he'd invited had come, which he interpreted as a verdict on his importance. He moved through pre-dinner conversation with the ease of a man who has never doubted that the room was arranged for his benefit. Dinner was served at 7. The wine came, a Burgundy I had selected with Hartwell's sommelier, Neil Park, who had 13 years in wine service and had been patient with my education on the subject. It was excellent. Several guests said so. At 8:14 p.m., I remember the time because I had glanced at my watch moments before, a habit from years of managing schedules. Victor stood and lifted his glass. I felt something tighten in my chest. Precognitive. The body knowing before the mind does. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about 25 years. He made a joke about how he'd known marriage was a serious business and had chosen to approach it with the same acumen he'd applied to his professional life. And then he said, "And I have to say, when people ask me how we met, I always love telling them. She was the maid. I married the maid." He grinned at the room like he'd said something charming, like it was a love story with a cute punchline, like I was part of the scenery. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. 1 second of silence. Then several people laughed, the uncomfortable, socially reflexive laughter of guests who aren't sure if something is a joke and have chosen, for the safety of the evening, to treat it as one. I sat in my navy dress and and felt 19 years old. Cold tile floor, other people's staircases, a mop handle at 6 in the morning, but I was 47. And something that had been bending for 25 years reached, at that moment, its absolute limit. Henry beside me had gone rigid. I found his wrist under the table. I pressed it once. Please, not yet. Not like this. Victor sat down, still smiling. He had the look of a man who has delivered a performance and awaits applause. She knows I'm joking, he said to the table generally. I'm not laughing, I said. The smile stayed but went careful. Oh, Alma, don't be so sensitive. Something rose in me that I did not try to contain. Not anger exactly, clarity. The specific, clarifying sensation of being completely done pretending. Don't humiliate me, I said. The words came out quiet. They didn't need volume. Victor blinked. Humiliate you? I'm telling the truth. You were the maid I married. Nobody laughed this time. Henry, Victor's voice took on the particular edge he used when he wanted to signal authority. Don't make that face. Dad, Henry's voice was flat, controlled in the way of a young man working very hard to stay that way. Stop, Victor turned on him. Stay out of this. Don't speak to our son like that, I said. Now you're correcting me? Victor leaned slightly forward, lowered his voice to the level that said, this is between us while 32 people watched. In front of everyone. You think you belong here, at this table, with my family? He had said some version of this to me in private so many times that I had developed antibodies to it. But the room, the guests, Henry's face, the white roses I had driven 40 minutes to select. I earned my place at this table, I said. He laughed, actually laughed. You earned nothing. You were the maid I married out of pity. Everything you have, everything you are, came from my name. Something happened inside me at those words. Not breaking. The opposite of breaking. I'm done, I said. Done with what? I set my napkin on the table. Pretending cruelty sounds like something else because you're wearing a good suit. You're making a scene, Alma. No. I kept my voice even. You made the scene. I'm choosing not to sit quietly inside it. Henry pushed his chair back. Mom, let's go. Victor's hand came flat on the table. No one is going anywhere. Henry stood, full height. He looked at his father with something I had never quite seen on his face before. Not anger, something past anger, something colder and more permanent. You cannot talk to her like that. Victor pointed. I am your father, and she is my mother. Henry said it like a verdict. She has been my mother every single day, in every way that matters, and you will not speak to her like that. Not tonight, not ever again. The room had the quality of held breath. That was when a chair scraped. I want to describe this correctly because it is the moment everything changed, and I never want to get it wrong. Mrs. Alden stood, slowly, both hands on her cane, the deliberate assembly of a 91-year-old body rising to its full height, which was not tall but did not need to be. Every person at that table went silent with the specific silence of witnesses. Even Victor, who feared nothing socially, went still. Grandmother, he said. His voice had a quality in it I had never heard before, something close to alarm. This is a misunderstanding. Sit down. No, she said. It is a pattern. She reached into her purse. Victor's face changed when he saw what she withdrew. A folded paper, aged at the creases, the pale yellow of something kept for a long time. His smile disappeared so completely it was as if it had been removed by hand. Grandmother, don't. She unfolded it with fingers that moved carefully and without apology. That is private correspondence, Victor said, and his voice had dropped into something I had never heard from him, naked fear. So was my humiliation, I said. You made that public. Mrs. Alden looked at me for one moment. Something passed between us. Not a new understanding, but the recognition of one that had existed for a long time. Then she addressed the room. 25 years ago, she said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has earned the right to the room's complete attention. When Alma told Victor she was pregnant, he sent me a letter. Henry turned to stone beside me. He asked me, Mrs. Alden continued, to help him find a way to end the relationship discreetly. He was concerned about what people would say, about whether he had been trapped, about his future. Victor, I was 24. I was scared, so was she. Mrs. Alden did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She was 20 years old. She was in a foreign country. She was pregnant by a man with more options than she had, and she became a mother. She became a wife. She became the most competent financial mind this family's company has employed in 3 generations. She looked down at the letter in her hands. You wrote to me that the maid had ruined everything, that people would say you had been trapped, that you could not throw away your future for one mistake. Henry's hand beside me on the table was completely flat and completely still. I was scared, Victor said again, quieter. We have established that, Mrs. Alden said. What we have not established is why your fear, 25 years ago, entitles you to cruelty tonight. Victor's hand came down on the table. She trapped me. I turned to Henry before those words could settle in him like sediment, before they could become part of how he understood his own beginning. I put my hand over his on the table. Look at me. He looked at me. His jaw was tight. His eyes were the eyes of my boy, my 24-year-old boy who had grown up in a house where the floor was always slightly uncertain. You were never a mistake, I said, not for a single second of a single day. Victor made a sound, impatient, dismissive, the sound of a man who has decided that the emotional register of the room is beneath him. He's old enough to know how life works. He's old enough, I said, to know how lies work and to know the difference. You had a good life, Victor said. The desperation was starting to show around the edges. Not guilt. Nothing as human as that, but the particular panic of a man whose performance is failing. My name, my house, my family's respect. Without me, you'd still be cleaning houses. For one moment, one long, specific moment, moment, the old shame reached for me. The bucket and the stares and the careful way people once handed me money without making eye contact. The way a household absorbed your presence and your labor and released you at the end of the day as if you had never been there. I thought of that girl, 19 years old, tired in every muscle, frightened in every thought, and still possessed of some irreducible core of dignity that no one had given her and no one had been able to take. I thought she deserved better than what I gave her. I spent 25 years apologizing for her existence. I am done. I lifted my napkin from my lap and set it on the table. Then I would have been tired, I said. Not small. The table was completely still. Victor gave a thin, hard laugh, the last resource of a man with no other moves. Leave then. Go ahead. But you'll come crawling back when you realize you have nothing. Mrs. Alden opened her purse a second time. She placed a blue legal folder on the table. Not hurried, not theatrical. With the precision of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and has arrived at it. Victor stared at the folder. The color in his face changed in a way I had never seen in 25 years. Not the flush of anger, but the pallor of someone who has just understood something terrible. What is that? He said. Mrs. Alden set her hands on her cane. She looked at her grandson the way you look at something you love that has disappointed you past the point of further negotiation. You know what it is, she said. Grandmother, the house on Aldenmere Drive, she said clearly, for the room, was placed in a revocable trust 8 years ago. I made that decision after Alma stayed with me through my hip replacement surgery, the infection that followed, and the 6 weeks of recovery during which she managed my medical appointments, my household, my correspondence, and my dignity. She paused. I asked my attorney, Franklin Marsh, 31 years in estate planning, a man of exceptional thoroughness, to draft the trust with a single condition, that it transfer upon my death or my voluntary assignment to the person who had treated the house like a home rather than an inheritance. Victor's voice had lost its structure. You gave my inheritance to the help. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Mrs. Alden turned to look at him for a long moment. No, she said. I gave my home to the only woman in this family who ever treated it like one. Victor pointed at me, not steadily. She's not blood. Mrs. Alden's eyes sharpened to something fine and old and completely without mercy. Neither is cruelty, and yet you inherited plenty of it. No one laughed. Victor turned to me. His face was rearranging itself into something new. The performance finally stripped off, and what was underneath was not complex. It was simply a man who had lost, looking at the person he had decided to blame for it. You knew, he said. You knew about this. No, I said. And that mattered, because I had been choosing to leave before I ever knew. What happened in the hour after Mrs. Alden placed that folder on the table is something I will not describe in full detail, because some of it belongs to Henry and some of it belongs to Mrs. Alden, and I am learning, finally, to understand the difference between the things that are mine to tell and the things that belong to other people. What I will tell you is this. Victor left Hartwell's at 9:02 p.m. He did not say goodbye. He took his jacket from his chair and walked out, and the door to the private dining room swung shut behind him, and the room sat in silence for a moment. And then Brianna Sato appeared quietly at the edge of the room and asked if anyone needed water, and several people said yes, and the evening reconstituted itself around that small act of grace. Mrs. Alden sat back down. Henry sat beside her. I sat on her other side, and she put her hand over mine on the tablecloth, and we sat like that for a long time without speaking. The roses were still beautiful. The burgundy was still excellent. Marcus Webb's kitchen sent out dessert without being asked, which was either standard protocol or instinct, and I did not ask which. I ate my dessert. It was a chocolate tart with sea salt, and it was perfect. I contacted my own attorney 12 days later. Her name is Rosalind Park, 20 years in family law, a practice that specializes in complex asset situations. A woman who once told me that the most important thing a client can do is document their contribution to a marriage's financial foundation before they file anything. I had been a formal employee of Haldwell Property Management for 16 years. I had pay stubs, performance reviews, written by Victor, which would prove useful, email chains establishing my role in major transactions, a consulting contract from year 12 that my accountant, David Munoz, 23 years in financial practice, thorough to the point of obsession, had recommended I formalize when my responsibilities expanded. You have a case, Rosalind said during our second meeting, with the particular calm of someone who makes this assessment carefully and means it when she makes it. A significant one. The divorce proceedings are ongoing. I will not detail them here because they are ongoing and because Rosalind has advised me on what is appropriate to discuss publicly, and I respect her expertise. What I will say is that I am living, in the interim, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city that is 1,200 square feet and has good light in the mornings and a balcony where I drink my coffee and watch the neighborhood come awake. It is the first space that has been entirely mine. I cannot describe what that feels like adequately to someone who has not spent 25 years living inside someone else's narrative of who they were. I will try. It feels like the first full breath after a long, long time of breathing shallowly. Henry comes for dinner on Thursdays. He brings groceries and cooks. He's better at it than I am, which is a fact I'm proud of and have no interest in hiding. And we sit at the table in my small kitchen and talk about his work and my work and the things that happened and the things that are still happening. He asked me once, about 3 months after the dinner, how I had managed to stay for 25 years. I thought about it honestly. I thought enduring was the same as being strong. strong, I said. I confused them. They're not the same thing. He nodded. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You were always strong though, even when you were enduring." I think about that a lot. Mrs. Alden called me last week. She is 91 years old and calls from a landline and speaks for exactly as long as she has things to say, and then says goodbye without ceremony. She asked how the apartment was. I told her about the light in the mornings. She said, "Good, light matters." Then she said, "You know I've been waiting for that night for a long time." Then she said goodbye. I held the phone for a while after she hung up. There is a legal process around the Aldenmere house. Franklin Marsh, Mrs. Alden's estate attorney, is managing the trust transfer with the rigor his 31 years of practice suggest you'd expect. Rosalind is coordinating with his office. Victor has contested certain elements. Of course he has. But the trust is well constructed and the documentation is thorough, and Rosalind says she has seen flimsier structures hold up in far worse conditions. I have not been to the house, not yet. I'm not sure what I will feel when I go, whether I will want it or whether what it means will be more valuable than what it is. I'm giving myself time to know the difference.